Okay, welcome everyone. It is 1:01 p.m. on Wednesday, April 3rd. This is the Assembly Legislative Committee, so I'm calling us to order. We are noticed until 2 p.m. We'll see if we take the full hour, and we've got some folks in the room as well as on the phone. So first, and my name is Anna Brawley, Chair of this committee. So first we will do the call to order and then introduction. So we'll start with members and then we'll come back to guests as well. So go ahead. We'll start with current members, sorry.
Zach Johnson.
Anna Brawley. And then on the phone, we have, it looks like Felix Rivera, you there?
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. And then I will also ask our folks at the table to introduce themselves. So go ahead, Mark.
Mark Littlefield with Eagle River.
Oh, go ahead.
Matthew Hurt, Legislative Council, and Dean Gates, Assembly Council. Oh, that's all.
Okay, thank you. And then we also have a couple of our interpreters. We have Jennifer Veneklassen from the Legislative Services Office, Liz Spano from the Clerk's Office, and then we have a guest in the back. So thank you, everybody. So let's go through our business, and we'll be giving some updates, and then we'll have a brief discussion about an item that is on our agenda for Tuesday, April 9th. That was postponed so that we could have that discussion in this committee. So first, we'll talk about highlights from the NLC conference and congressional advocacy visit in DC. So that was myself and Chair Constant as the National League of Cities liaisons or members. We were able to attend what's called the Congressional City Conference, and it is really a congressional fly-in to our federal delegation and everybody from around the country from their various cities, towns, and villages meeting with their members. So it was a very successful visit. We had conversations with our three Alaska delegation members talking about the Port of Alaska project and how that's moving along, the modernization work, the upcoming phases. We were able to talk about our financing plan, which was great. We had a great discussion about housing and all the other work that we're doing. And then really the biggest part of our visit is actually the next item, and it is HUD advocacy. So I'll just give a brief update. I believe we've shared this since we got back from that conference, but essentially it was myself, Chair Constant, also Meg Zalatel was there in her capacity as the head of the Anchorage Coalition and Homelessness. And the three of us met with senior officials from HUD, including their data folks, the people who work on their formula funding for homelessness. Obviously, there's a lot of different pieces that HUD does. So really focused on our continuum of care funding, which allows us to do a lot of work in homelessness. And we're able to talk about inequities in the formula that I know have been discussed before. Essentially that we, for example, have about the same number of folks experiencing homelessness as the city of Houston, Texas. But because Houston, Texas is a much larger city, the formula means they get about 10 times as much funding as we do through that formula. So we really had discussions about, some opportunities to change that. There was some other kind of in the weeds information about how our COC gets dinged on certain performance or, project funding. So it was really good conversation. We were joined by all three of our congressional offices. So we had Representative Peltola and her chief of staff. We had the chief of staff for Senator Sullivan. And we also had, I think not chief of staff, but a senior person with Senator Murkowski's office. So really we're able to show that unified front, and we're talking about the challenges in Alaska as well as in places like Hawaii that are, not connected to the rest of the United States, and really describing those unique challenges that we face. So no immediate action out of that, but really a good conversation and one that we will continue to follow up. And I know our partners will follow up. Basically, the difference between us and Houston is they have a lot more federal money to enact the same types of programs that we're doing. So imagine how much more we could do if we had more funding. So I kind of combined both those items, but just seeing if there's any questions or additional comments from members on those. And I'll note, Mr. Rivera, if I'm not looking at my phone, please feel free to speak up, but I will try to keep an eye on my phone if you text to be in the queue. Oh, go ahead, Member Branca.
So I know you were asking Juneau, you were down in Juneau asking for the shelter, 4 million to continue that. was that also part of the conversation with HUD sheltering, or just the long-term housing, the more next step kind of action, or did shelter also come up?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we'll talk about the state shelter funding in a bit, but in terms of the federal, we didn't specifically make a funding request for shelter funding, but we did talk about essentially the work we're already doing. It's challenging because HUD, it isn't that they don't fund shelter, but typically shelter operating funds are not paid for through HUD dollars, at least not the type that we're operating. So it's really more a conversation about things like housing vouchers, about other programs that are operating. And again, it's formula funding. And so our ask was really to consider changing the formula because we are so disadvantaged in how we get those funds. But we were sharing basically all the other work we're doing and saying, if we had more money, here's what we could be doing. So yeah, so thanks for the question. Other questions or comments? Okay, not seeing any, but I know that is something that we will continue to be tracking. And obviously, if there's other ways that we could advocate for more funding, we will do that. So then in terms of new business, do we have our lobbyist on the line by chance? Okay, that's fine.
Certainly do, Anna. Both Heather and I are both on.
Oh, great. Okay, so that was, sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah, let me just change microphones. Well, actually, I'll say, I won't touch it again right now, but just recognizing Wendy Chamberlain and Heather Breaks from Legislative Consultants are lobbyists. So I will turn it to you for a brief update. So go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'll do the budget and the issues like that, and then Heather will do any legislative things that are going on bills. So the House is working through the operating budget, in-house finance, and they're doing amendments. As you probably saw, Representative Josephson proposed an amendment for our Anchorage $4 million that was our number one or highest priority for shelter, and it failed 5 yeas, 6 nays. That was the day before yesterday. We have done a lot of work on that behind, and I think you'll hear about it in caucus tonight, but I think both Heather and I feel very good about that. There's some discussions going on. We've had some, and I think that we do feel good. I won't say much more than that, just to be careful of what I do say. But I think Anchorage has a lot of support, even from the rural areas, recognizing that we need to address this. I talked to some of the rural members and they agree we need to address it. Best case scenario for us, we get it in the House operating budget. That's the first vehicle. If we can get it in that, then we don't have to deal with it as, along the way. In the capital budget, I'd rather get it in the House. I have heard that we didn't get it, that we didn't get the first time. There are 5 or 6 more opportunities, and I expect or am hoping and being positive that we will get it. So that's where we're at there. Does anybody have any questions on that?
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. Questions from members? Okay, I'm not seeing any right now, but if any come up, we can come back to it.
So I'll just tell everybody, we'll hear something in caucus tonight about our plan moving forward. I think Andy Josephson and the senators will have some good ideas, but we're front and center. So we'll let you know as soon as anything moves. Then we go over to the Senate and we'll have the capital budget come back over from the Senate. So it's kind of a very intense time right now, but we're hoping that Anchorage does well.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then if there's any other updates, Heather, that you'd like to give or highlights on any bills, please go ahead.
Sounds like Heather may have dropped off. So she's got a committee hearing. So I think a couple of bills to highlight, that the big things for us, municipal assistance, school bond debt reimbursement, We're checking on our transportation, the $1 million we share. If that going in the House, but if not, we'll get that put in the Senate. As far as bills, Forrest Dunbar's bill, Senator Dunbar's bill on dilapidated property, it still remains in rules. No House bills are moving in the Senate, no Senate bills in the House. Let me just say it's very tense right now between the two bodies as the House is struggling mightily to get anything done, whether it be education bill. They just haven't been able to move. They have a very slim majority. So the Senate is waiting for the House to send things over. The House is not letting anything of the Senate go. That should free up in the next 3 to 4 weeks as we get these budget bills moved over to each body. I think right now there's a lack of trust that the other body will send the bill over. So I think they're just waiting. So legislation has not moved on from where it is. Some bills that really haven't had a big impact are moving, but other than that, a couple of resolutions and that, nothing on our side is moving right now. It will though.
Okay, thank you very much for the update. Any other questions from folks? Okay, I'm not hearing any for now, but thank you again for your work. And yeah, we will look forward to continuing to follow our priorities.
And we have that 5:15 caucus today, so all the members are coming over to our offices on the Anchorage caucus. They'll be able to fill you in on a lot of things that are going on.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just for information, so our Anchorage delegation is all of our legislators who represent districts within the municipality. So everywhere from Shukiak, Eagle River down to Girdwood. And they have been working really hard. The co-chairs, Senator James Kaufman and Representative Donna Mears are the co-chairs of that, really working to build some consensus around common priorities for Anchorage and all of our communities in the Muni. And of course, they're not going to agree on everything, but really trying to work together. And that is how we were able to get $200 million a couple of years ago from the legislature for our port. And so when they work together, good things happen. So so myself and Chair Constant are going to be giving a brief briefing to them by Zoom this evening, and hopefully again following up on our priorities. And I think Wendy summarized kind of where we're at on the big ones. So Wendy and Heather, you're welcome to stay on the line if you like. Otherwise, we're going to keep moving on. And thanks again for your work.
Okay, talk to you tonight, Kristen. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Anna. Bye.
Thanks. See you tonight.
Yep, thank you. Okay, and then so I'll just briefly add, I think Wendy covered them, but items that we're tracking from the Assembly side that are in our legislative priorities, the $4 million for emergency cold weather shelter. As Wendy said, the amendment failed, but we're still hopeful that will come through. So that's kind of waiting to see what happens. A couple other priorities that we are watching. She mentioned the blight bill, the allowing for tax incentives to rehabilitate blighted property, and then also being able to deal with nuisance properties. So we're waiting to see what happens with that, but also hopeful. And then another one just to mention, there was a legislative request for $650,000 from the health department, or it would go to the health department for integrated medical and behavioral health outreach services, really working with our complex folks experiencing homelessness and other complex issues. So we're not necessarily confident that will get in the budget, but we will try. Because as we know, there's not an ample amount of resources, and there's a lot of competing needs, as hopefully will sound familiar to us in the city as well. So that's where we're at right now, and we are just continuing to watch as much as possible. I guess a couple others that we do feel good about, but TBD what happens, the community assistance funding. So that is state funding that goes to communities. All communities get a portion of it. Alaska or Anchorage would get about $4 million if that fund was fully capitalized. And so as we understand it, the legislature has put that in the budget. That is a priority to keep in there. And so we are hopeful that will come through. Of course, it's a small part of our budget, but still any bit helps. And then House Bill 89 regarding a child care subsidy program. Julie Colombe's bill on the House side is now in the Senate, and it seems to be moving along. We passed a resolution in support of it because we know childcare is such a huge issue in the municipality. Also waiting to see what happens with that, but hopefully we can move that along. So if you have folks in your Senate district, it wouldn't hurt to say, hey, this is a priority. Please support this bill. But I know there is some pretty broad support so far. So I think that's our updates as far as kind of assembly action right now. So let's move on to our discussion of AR. So this is a proposed resolution AR 2024-99. This was something, and I want to check if Member Solt is here. I don't know if he's on the phone. Okay, and I don't know if we can expect him. So he prepared this resolution. It was on our agenda on March 19th, and it was postponed to our meeting of April 9th, so our next regular meeting, so that we could have a little bit of a discussion about it in this committee today. So this is this resolution supports House Bill 254, which is sponsored by Representative Sarah Vance, and it would prohibit publishing and distributing pornography to minors on the internet. What I want to note, I don't know a whole lot about this bill, but my understanding of the bill itself is, it's not a debate about whether we want kids to see pornography. I think so hopefully we can set that aside, right? I think no one's arguing for that. I think the challenge is, how do we do that? And then I guess one question I wish Mr. Solt was here to ask is, what is the nexus of this particular bill with muni priorities or kind of operations, or how would this affect the city, right? Because I think that's kind of the two things we need to look at is this bill going to do, is it a policy that will accomplish what its goal is, and is there a nexus with the municipality? So what we have right now is really the resolution about the bill. It's not always helpful to kind of walk everybody through the line by line language of a legislative bill. But my understanding of it is that it would require essentially providing an ID. And if you look at the last whereas on page 1, it mentions a commercial age verification system, similar to when you buy alcohol, right? They check your ID. And that would require somebody to basically input their ID if they're an Alaska resident, in order to view pornography sites, right, to verify that they're 18. And so that is what it's proposing. And I can share just briefly, I did a little bit of research on this, and I know it's had a couple hearings in House Judiciary. And I should say, when I say research, I wasn't trying to go to pornography sites. I was reading about the policy. But what I found is actually a few other states have implemented this. A couple of them have been stopped by court orders because it's considered basically an unconstitutional violation of the Interstate Commerce Clause to regulate the internet. There's some legal challenges there. And then the other one is really some sites have basically not allowed any access in their state. And so, and maybe that's good or bad, right? that if you're a resident of a certain state, you can't access those sites, whether or not you're an adult or a kid. But what has actually happened is a lot of folks end up using what's called virtual private networks, or VPNs. And so if you're not familiar with that term, it's basically a way to mask your IP address. So you could say you're from another country. A lot of folks use it to watch movies maybe that are blocked in their country, or shows. It can be used to circumvent things like this, like age verification. And also, accessing the dark web, honestly, is a big use of it. And the dark web is really kind of unregulated, lots of scary stuff on there, right? Like things that are not necessarily in there. And so basically the effect of bills like this has been that either people end up using VPNs, or they end up going on sites that, for example, my understanding, I guess, is some of the major sites do have an age verification that they make you complete themselves. It's a voluntary one. And so those sites stop operating in those states. And then instead you have folks that go to maybe, I guess, less reputable sites, we can put it that way. And so the concerns that I have with this bill really are around, like, will it achieve the goal that is put forward? And that's the research that I've done. So I can report that. Unfortunately, we didn't have Mr. Solt here to speak to kind of what he sees as the nexus between this and our muni piece. But But I guess I'll open it up for discussion if others have comments or questions, knowing that I'm not the bill sponsor, so I'm not going to answer those. But go ahead, Member Johnson.
Yeah, thanks. I think my questions and concerns about this are similar to yours. And again, I think just probably all will feel the need to say, I do not support kids accessing pornography, and I recognize the harms when they do that. But recognizing that, I think most teenagers, at least, or even younger kids, are proficient enough with the internet to figure out how to pretty easily bypass these things through VPNs, as you mentioned. And then also this question about, the constitutionality and individual right to privacy. And I believe even in Alaska, our state constitution has a higher standard of a right to privacy than what's enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. So has anyone brought up, not just, I understand in other states people have raised this issue, but in the conversation around this bill in the Alaska legislature, has anyone talked about the legality of it for Alaska?
That is a good question. So I know it's had, I believe, 2 hearings in House Judiciary in March. I did not go back and watch those. My guess is somebody brought that up, but I don't know the answer to that actually. But that is a good point that our state constitution has its own provisions as well.
Yeah, and I guess, it's an interesting question, right? And I suppose ultimately it'd be the courts that test it. But if it looks like just on its face that it would not, it would run afoul of the state constitution, I think I'd find it hard to support something recognizing that. Again, and this is an open question in my mind. I don't know if anyone from council wants to weigh in on this. I won't put them on the spot necessarily unless they want to jump in. But it'd be nice to have a better sense of the legality of this before we consider taking a position.
We're just giving you the easy ones.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Not even 2:00 and we're talking about pornography on a Wednesday. So normally it's not the job of the Assembly Council's office to opine on pending legislation before the state legislature. That's legislative legal at the state legislature's job. And I know Vice Chair Zalatel was very much wanting to see what their opinion on this legislation is. I can say, having looked at it, there are some interesting features of it. The fact that it does take an established definition for obscenity from Miller v. California, which is the Supreme Court's kind of landmark decision, U.S. Supreme Court's landmark decision discussing obscenity, but it does put in some caveats. Instead of just using the definition of obscenity, it uses it for a minor. The fact that it defines the activity to be regulated as to what's appropriate for a minor, but a minor is defined by anyone under the age of 18. That covers a broad range of people and what's appropriate. What's appropriate for a 2-year-old is not necessarily appropriate for a 17-year-old. And the other interesting fact about the law is that the enforcement mechanism is a civil lawsuit. So it's not a prosecutor or an attorney's office with the state is going to be making a decision as to whether or not service runs afoul of this law. It's up to individual citizens who basically feel that material that's inappropriate for someone under the age of 18 has been accessed by someone under the age of 18 can bring a lawsuit against anybody, which is, it is a valid engine of social change. It's just it allows for a much more varied and diverse field of results in trying to enforce the law being passed. So those are the key features that kind of caught my eye. But yeah, I can't opine as to. I certainly wouldn't want to get in front of Ledge Legal as to whether or not they thought it comported with the Alaska Constitution.
Yeah, thanks. I guess to follow you raised an interesting question. Is there anything you can think of that feels somewhat analogous where the enforcement mechanism is through a civil lawsuit as opposed to criminal action?
So obviously the law that sprang immediately to mind is the recently passed restrictions on abortion in the state of Texas that triggered a significant amount of federal litigation. where there were, instead of basically making a criminal penalty for providing abortion services to people within the state of Texas, they authorized civil lawsuits for anybody essentially aiding anyone in receiving abortions. And it had almost kind of a universally chilling effect, I guess, on anybody seeking, and this was pre-Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health that this law was passed. But the fact that, the hypothetical that even the Uber driver that took a woman to a place to get an abortion could be sued for assisting her in getting an abortion. It's that aspect of it that I think would give a lot of attorneys pause to the feasibility of basically creating a new civil action with really broad definitions and basically anyone being able to enforce it. And I just like to say that generally in civil actions where somebody's child is harmed by another person, there are already lawsuits available to a person to sue another person for harming their child or providing obscene material to their child. So it's not like this is a gap in the civil lawsuit regime in Alaska that has been screaming for address, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly add, as far as legislative process, yeah, we certainly are not legislative legal. My understanding from my very limited experience working on bills is legislative legal does provide memos to sponsors. So whether it's an amendment or a bill, that will outline, potential concerns or questions. I've seen plenty of legal memos that say, hey, this might violate the Constitution, but it's your right to introduce it anyway. So that certainly could be out there. I just checked the legislative website, the materials for this bill. I didn't see any legal memo that was posted. So if one exists, of course it is legislative privilege to whether or not you produce that publicly. And so in the absence of us having that, the best we have is Matthew and Dean. So thank you very much. But yeah, I suspect some of those questions were raised. Other comments? Go ahead, Member Braga.
I don't know is it okay that I don't ask a question? Okay. So I feel like looking at social media algorithms is probably where I think the most help could be, they're just lingering on a picture of a buxom person on the internet probably floods a teenager with a million pictures. I know that I tend to get lots of Depends ads on my Facebook algorithm, and I don't know why, but it's really unfortunate how much negative stuff is getting pushed out to kids, and so that might kind of deal with this issue as well.
Yeah, that is a good point. And I think that's really where the crux of the question is not, do we want kids to be safe, but is this going to accomplish the goal that it's trying to? And then also, are there various legal issues and constitutional issues that get in the way of that? And then I guess, I don't know if I am struggling to find a direct nexus to the interest of the municipality here. That's the other piece just to bring up. And of course, others may have opinions on that. Certainly, we are free to and have taken positions on things that are not just about municipal business that do affect the community at large. But also, I do try to be mindful of what we pass resolutions on, or at least what I would bring as resolutions, to make sure that, especially when we're dealing with state legislative bills, because there's, things that I may feel strongly about as a person, or possibly that affect my district, that don't affect other districts, just as an example. So that's kind of the other lens that I've applied to this. But I guess I'll see if there's any other comments, because I don't want to spend all our time on this. Any comments, questions, thoughts on this? And Mr. Rivera, feel free to speak up if you have a comment as well. Okay, I'm not hearing any right now. Okay, so just to say again, this will be on our agenda April 9th because it was postponed from our March 19th meeting. It is not a public hearing item because it is a resolution, but we will come back to it. And I will say my personal recommendation is simply that we postpone this indefinitely. So that is the motion I intend to make at the time. Okay, so let's move on. Bills of interest and other potential actions. I know we covered a few already, but I'll just see, especially conversations you all have been having or things you've heard about in other districts. I don't know if there's other kind of district capital projects out there or bills that you're tracking or just things you want to bring to attention that we should be paying attention to. I'm looking around, I'm not seeing anybody at the moment, and I do not have ones beyond what I already shared. Go ahead, Member Branca.
Can you explain what the daycare, do you have more details on what Representative Colomb is suggesting or that's her bill, correct? Do you know how it would work? Is it?
Yeah, so I don't know all of the details. I do know, so we passed a resolution back in, I think it was a couple meetings ago, early March. And then I went back and looked for, just to attach to that resolution, what the general idea of it is. So I would go back and look at the materials from that. And it was, I believe it was AR 2024-89. And I only remember that because it's House Bill 89 and it happened to be Resolution 89. So thanks to the clerk staff for that. But I would say go back and look at that. But I believe some of the pieces are it expands eligibility for childcare assistance, that it raises the income level somewhat, so more people are eligible for that. There's also some tax credits or tax incentives for employers to, I think, either offer or pay for childcare services. So it's really, it's not creating a program that's run by the state, but it's really changing some other pieces. And my understanding is those were recommendations from the governor's child care task force. So it's not all of the recommendations, but it came out of that process. So, so yeah, I would go back and look at that resolution. Yeah. And then I know that they have like a sponsor statement and they kind of explain what it's supposed to do, but yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Other comments or questions about the legislature that you would like to say on the record? Okay, I'm not hearing any. I guess one that I'll mention, just because I know it's continuing to be a big issue, is education funding. You know, and we've talked at length about that before, but we do know that there are other active bills. There is right now a $680 increase to the BSA in the budget, as I understand it, unless that changed in the last 24 hours. And so there's not a whole lot we can do at this point. And of course, we know the school board is going to need to deal with the fallout or the consequences of whatever happens this session. But just to say that's not a settled question, so we're still monitoring that. Okay. Well, then I think we can move on. We have our kind of standing updates, and I know that's a little bit duplicative of these other pieces. I don't know if there's any other updates folks want to give on anything else you're tracking. Or I guess I'll ask as well, I don't know if folks have had a chance to talk to your state legislators. So the district and member priorities, that's really more like local capital projects or things like that. I'm not really aware of kind of where those are at in the budget. I know we've heard there will not be a large capital budget because there are so many needs and limited revenue. But I don't know if anybody's heard anything or if there's a project that you're really advocating for that we could be helpful with. Go ahead.
Along with supporting the shelter, I had also included in my letter some support for more long-term, where we have jobs training and drug rehab and just like right now, the shelter just seems like a holding pattern, and they're doing a great job for what they're doing, but we need some facilities that are helping them get to the next step. So I had put a plug in for the Downtown Hope Center because I was super impressed with what was going on there. And they want to expand and start a thrift store and small engine repair. I mean, all kinds of, she's got a big vision. So I'm hoping that we can get some traction for that in the future so that we're not just holding people, we're moving them forward.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great point. Other comments? Go ahead, Member Johnson.
Yeah, I guess that kind of raises an interesting question in my mind. So, there's still a lot of uncertainty about whether or not we'll get the $4 million we're asking for from the state to continue operations the cold weather shelter. And given the fact that, the clock is ticking, if you will, have you thought about sort of the timing of this? I mean, is there a plausible scenario wherein we decide we don't have confidence the funding is going to be available and we've hit the deadline to close the shelter? And then, just God forbid we close and then find out a week later, oh wait, actually Juneau came through for us. Now quickly, let's all scramble to try and stand it back up. I mean, are we contemplating what it might take to sort of bridge that time span, or do you think in all likelihood with our current deadline for closing the shelter, we will know by then whether or not we'll have the funding from the state to continue operations?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I guess I'll share what I know or I guess opinions, and then I don't know if Member Rivera wants to add as well because I know he's been involved. I guess from my perspective, I know the regular session is supposed to end. I think the last day would be May 14th, something like that. So in theory, it is a short turnaround. We already know that that the health department is planning to close both of the hotel sites. So there's still, the one shelter is what we're talking about. But either way, there will be a step down of those other properties by the 31st. And in fact, I believe the Aviator is going to start stepping down April 6th. So we know that's happening. But yeah, I think that is a difficult question. And I think, we do have short-term options, as I understand it. We could give, for example, an interfund loan with the idea that it could get paid back. But I think it does certainly create uncertainty. And so I know that's something, I don't know that there's a plan at this point. And so I'll see Member Rivera. I don't know if you've heard different, but I think ultimately it's still the health department, but go ahead.
Yeah, so certainly my expectation is that the legislature will complete their work on time, in particular because it is a election year and they tend to get out on time during election years. So I would be surprised if they go past the May 14th deadline. But if they do and they haven't passed a budget and we think it's going to get in the budget, then I think we have options at that point. I would like the administration to present those options to us, but I'd imagine one of those options outside of the interfund loan would be for us to temporarily dip into the fund balance, which like we did during the pandemic, and then refill those funds once we get the $4 million from the state. But I'd only do that if we had some amount of certainty, some great amount of certainty that the state was going to move forward with the $4 million and that the governor wasn't going to veto it. So yeah, a lot of things up in the air, but my hope is that they're done in a month or so.
Yeah, and I think that's a conversation we can keep having with the health department as far as what they're looking at, and other members of the administration, kind of what they would propose as the plan. But yeah, there's certainly uncertainty. What we know right now is if we don't have the funding, it is going to close May 31st. So for better or worse, that's where we are. Other comments or other topics we should bring up? Okay, I'm not seeing any right now. And so I will see, I know we have one member of the audience. So is anybody wanting to give audience participation today? Okay, looks like we have one member, so come on up. Please use a microphone. The clerk can help you. And then please remember to state your name and what part of town you live in. And then we don't usually do hard limits, but if you can keep it about 3 minutes, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Green. Okay. I'm Miss Sophia O'Neill, and I reside and have a residence in Eagle River. Upon listening to the legislature, I came for the public safety meeting, but I wanted to share perhaps a little bit of insight. One of the things that you are perhaps or perhaps not aware of is, for instance, a license, an Alaska license, proof of residence on many electronic applications is an absolute requirement. And I can prove by printout that it is stated as mandatory before a job applicant's application will go fully through, allowing the applicant to finish the process. Sometimes they're not even told. Sometimes it is just simply something goes awry. I looked deeply into it, and there really isn't a way to supplement that or use something in lieu of. And so this can be an impetus to someone perhaps moving forward within the system, not because they're not wanting to, not because they don't have the motivation to, not because there's something that precedes it that would, prevent them from being able to obtain work. So this is something, if it could be addressed, as well as a little bit more attention to detail in reference to a person's private information. When you go to use a public library or in a computer, many people are regulated because of socioeconomic, perhaps they're not online. They don't have a network system to protect them when they do their applications, such as in putting in their most pertinent information. And sometimes people will resort to a VPN if they can afford it. But then there are websites such as that I've seen that require a security clearance. So therefore, it does not allow a VPN. But if you do not have a private setup, you are made vulnerable by the public system of trying to do your applications online at perhaps a library. And absolutely, you cannot use a public Wi-Fi system. So this kind of puts a damper on people moving forward. And if attention was brought to this, you might see a little bit more success and not as many as 900, which I could tell you is quite a bit higher than that, because people are afraid to be known and to come forward and say, I am struggling, or I am in an impetus where I am in a situation where I cannot move forward, because there's these specific things that are impeding it. And there has been so much, how do I say? Well, I won't address that. I think what I've said is enough to start with. And the next time that I have an opportunity to speak in front of the assembly, I'll be more prepared and not so impromptu. I've done a lot of research on this, and I have experience. And so I'm sharing this representing only myself and my thoughts and my aspect from an educated point of view. I don't represent any agency or government or private. So just wanted to put that out there. All right. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Yeah, thank you. And then I'll also say for members of the public, if you do want to share more thoughts beyond what you shared, you can always do that in writing as well, especially if you have more information you'd like us to look at. So, okay. And then I don't think there's anybody else on the phone. Okay. So with that, I will, unless there's other business, I think we can adjourn. So, all right. Seeing some nods. So thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.